If you've ever photographed waterfalls, you'll probably know that they come with a specific set of challenges. You've got loads of white gushing water together with dark wet rocks and sometimes even a very bright sky. Now the margin of error for coming home with perfect exposures is minimal. So let's take a look at how to make the most of a situation like this. Waterfall scenes often have a lot of reflections that can easily get overexposed and thereby letting you come home with a failed shot. I usually shoot without a polarizer, and I know that many would just throw on a polarizer and cut away all the reflections. But I have a little different approach. Let's take a look at a couple of images I shot with and without a polarizer. This one is with a polarizer, and you can see there's a huge area here where nothing really happens. There's a few reflections down here, but all in all, the reflections are handled quite well. But you're also missing out on something. So this one is shot without a polarizer. And you can see you got some beautiful reflected lights that you would otherwise cut out. And you can see also up here and a little bit here, you get the reflections of what is happening in the upper part of the scene. And it's reflected down into the water. I think it's a shame to cut away these beautiful reflections. So let's talk about what you can do at the scene to better manage the exposure so you don't get those blown out highlights. By just changing the camera angle and the camera position a little bit, you can actually cut away most reflections. If possible, I would suggest that you use side lighting, as the reflections comes when you have the sun like behind your subject and the light bounces into the water and up into your camera. So if you can use side lighting or front lighting, most of the shots I'll show you here is actually shot using front lighting or a little bit of side lighting. If there's a part of the scene that's in shadow or is covered by a large tree or something, that'll also give you at least some areas of the scene that is in shadow, and this is much easier to work with. Or better yet, if you're under a dense layer of leaves like a canopy, that will also help a lot to manage reflections and highlights, making the exposure more even. If you just tilt your camera a little bit downwards, so you avoid having the sky in the scene, that'll make everything so much easier. If you take a look at this image, I've framed it so that the sky is not even included in the image. And this makes it so much easier for the camera to handle the otherwise high contrast, because the sky would likely be together with parts of the water here. That would be the brightest parts. So let's move on to how you can manage the exposure. You will want to take a look at the histogram often and avoid that either of the sides are spiking. You want a more balanced and like middle focused histogram, but remember that what is dark in the scene should also show up in the darker tones on the histogram. You don't want to push it too far to one side. You want to capture the dark tones and capture the highlights without any of these blowing out. But not all cameras can handle such a high contrast. And this is the time when you should bracket your shots. When you take multiple exposures with the exact same composition, normal exposure, one underexposed and one overexposed, and then take the best from each of these and combine them in something like Photoshop. Now I find that most of the time with my camera, 2 exposures is enough to handle everything. As you can see on this underexposed image, the highlights are handled pretty well. They are not blowing out. They are not so interesting, but that's due to the weather. But at least they're not blowing out, and there are no reflections here that is blown out in this shot. However, we have a few spots that's maybe a little bit too dark, and that is what I would try to fix using the normal exposed image, where you have a lot more definition, or you have a lot more texture in these areas. You can actually see the details underneath here. So these are the areas that I would blend in using Photoshop to combine those two, just masking them in. We don't have time to go into depth with this, but just to explain the overall process. And then you end up with something like this, which you can see has a lot more depth and no issues with the highlights and no issues with the deeper shadows as well. So far you have handled everything at the scene by changing the composition and handling the exposure issues by bracketing your shots. When it's time to process your images, you still have to think about contrast, but now you have more freedom. You can actually start to increase the contrast. So before you try to box the contrast in so you don't get these highlights or deep shadow issues, now it's time to use contrast to create depth in your image. And you can do that in several ways. The most logical one is to use tonal contrast. That is, play with the highlights and play with the shadows and use them selectively by dodging and burning. Let's take a look at what I did to enhance this image in post. So after blending the images, I actually darkened a few areas, and let's use a red to show this. I actually darkened this part, this stone. I darkened this. I darkened the shore part here. I darkened this one a little. Even though I did bring in a bit details in blending the shots, I still want to darken it a bit. And also darkened this part, some of the trees, the branches, and I also darkened this. And almost everywhere where I darkened, I brightened just behind it. So this part is also brightened a bit. The top part of the branch is brightened, also here. So the principle is to create depth by altering between highlights and shadows. Highlights and shadows. As you can see, we have a bright area here, goes into a darker area, then moves into a brighter area, and darker, brighter, and a little bit brighter, dark, brighter. So I think you get the point. By changing this, you can actually perceive the depth that's already in the image, but we're just enhancing it to make it come forward. And another principle is you can use dark areas, which I also did with the branches, using the tone contrast to create like leading lines that's leading into the image. And you can use both dark areas or bright areas like this, also like this. Everything is making the attention go deeper into the image. Now, enough about tonal contrasts. You would also want the colors to pop out a bit more, but instead of just like throwing on a saturation layer and boosting the saturation all over the image, try to think of it as a tool to enhance the depth in the image by making color contrast. What I did actually was that I added some extra saturation to this area and to this area and to this one, because that in itself makes a very good contrast. So by adding the saturation in specific areas, you reinforce that tendency to look into the image, so you get like drawn in. Now, to finalize this image, I also added a high pass filter to create a little bit of sharpness, but again, I masked in the sharpness on specific points. I added contrast to these stones, a little bit to the branch. Not all of the water, because the water is soft, but where the waterfall is quite thin, like these parts, this, and also this. I did add a little bit of sharpness, so you can really see like the contrast between the white streaks of foam or air bubbles that's captured in the water in contrast to the darker water. So sharpness can help you do that in a very subtle way. And then a few spots of the moss I did also, and also on the rock up here. I didn't put a lot on the branches because I don't want you to look at the branches. I want you to look like mostly in this area here, and then of course look up at the beautiful watermill building. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. But remember, if you don't have a beautiful waterfall nearby and only got flat and boring landscapes, I have a video about how you can capture that right up here. See you over there. Take care.